So you're at the store and you're looking at seed packets, and there are a lot of terms that are thrown around, and unfortunately, you don't know these terms. So what are you left to do? Well, you're either left to pull out your phone, do some research right there on the spot, or you got this video. In today's episode, we're going to talk all about terminologies when used on seed packets to help you understand the things that you see, the words that are being used, so you can be a more informed shopper when you're seed shopping. Let's go. All right, so the first terminology that we're going to give you guys is an icon that a lot of people see but don't understand what it means, and it's this icon right here. And basically, I'll give you a close-up on it, but it's basically an icon of a plant with a little arrow that goes all the way around and then meets back where the arrow starts. And there's a time, this is 2 to 4 weeks. For instance, on this Antiqua bean here, it's 2 to 4 weeks. That is actually the succession planting schedule. So if you're planting in succession, that's where you plant one row, you're gonna wait 2 to 4 weeks before starting that second row. And then you're gonna wait 2 to 4 weeks, and you're gonna start that third row. That is the succession planting. You don't have to plant by that. You don't have to, that's not necessarily required. But if you are gonna succession plant, that is the icon and the time frame that you're looking for. So that's the first thing, is succession planting. All right, so now we're gonna talk about another term here that's thrown around a lot, and that is zone hardiness. So zone hardiness, you're typically gonna find it's usually phrased something like zone hardy, and then it'll give us a zone number. Zones can be anywhere from 1 all the way down to 13. And basically what that indicates is the average coldest temperature that you're going to experience during winter. So it only applies to perennials. If you're growing something like a tomato or lettuce, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know what your zone is for those things because those are annuals. They grow and then they die. We'll talk about annual perennial in a second, which I assume you probably already know what those are. But a perennial is a plant that grows from year to year. It comes back every single year. It goes dormant in the winter and then regrows in the spring. That's a perennial. And so if you're growing something like that, like in the case of this broadleaf sage, that is a perennial, and you're going to want to know if you're going to grow it as a perennial, you're going to want to know what your zone is. And you can find that from a basic zone hardiness map. Just pull that up. Farmer's Almanac has a really good one. USDA has another really good one. There's quite a few different zone hardiness maps that exist out there. But basically, you're going to pull that up, find where you're at on that map, and it's going to tell you if that plant you're growing can survive or not. All right, next terminology here, as I just talked about, is the difference between annual, perennial, and biennial. Those three terms are thrown around a lot because that's what defines all of the plants you're going to come across. They're either an annual, perennial, or a biennial. And so an annual, as the name implies, is a plant you grow, and you grow it for one season. It's an annual plant. It dies after the cold weather comes. So after you get your frost, it's going to die. Or it may be a perennial, which is a plant that can come back year after year. It's going to survive. Then there's the biennial, and this one chokes up a lot of people. It has some traits of an annual and some traits of a perennial. Prime example are your onions. Onions will grow the first year and they will flower the second year. That's what makes a biennial, is it grows, it survives winter, but then flowers that second year. And that's really the only difference between an annual, a perennial, and a biennial. Very simple to understand, but at the end of the day, you gotta know those terms because again, depending on what you're growing, you're gonna wanna know if it's gonna come back. That way you can plan for it, right? You don't wanna plant a perennial in an area that you're not going to want it there every single year, right? If you're constantly rotating your garden around, you're not going to want a perennial in that spot. So you want to know what you're planting and how it's classified. All right, the next term you're going to come across that we don't have here in our shop, but you're definitely going to come across if you're looking in big box stores, is the term improved. Now, prime example here, we have a Landreth's bush bean, a Landreth's stringless bean. And oftentimes you're going to find a hybrid version of this same exact seed that's called a Landreth's improved bean. And a lot of people fear picking those out because they fear that they are GMO. They're not GMO. We'll talk about that in a second as well, but you can't get a GMO crop for the home garden. They just don't exist. You're not going to come across them. The term improved basically means that plant scientists and plant breeders have chosen the most productive varieties and improved on them for basically an increased chance of success. They basically taken a really reliable variety and then increased not only the viability, but also the production per acre. It's typically seen on more of a large scale. Home gardeners can definitely benefit from it as well. Obviously, you might only need 6 plants when you would normally need 10, right? So you need 40% less plants, but it basically just means that it's an improvement upon an already good gene pool or a gene strain that then they're improving on. That's all it means. It does also mean that it's going to be a hybrid. And so we'll talk about that now, because that's another thing that chokes up a lot of people, which is the difference between heirloom, open pollinated, hybrid, and GMO. All right, so next we're going to talk about the terminologies of hybrid, open pollinated, and heirloom seeds, because this actually catches a lot of people off guard. When they go to the store, they see these terms and they've heard them, but they don't really know what they actually mean. And so I'm going to break them down. So basically a hybrid is essentially a cross between two like species crops. So if you have, for instance, I don't know, we could take this, this provider bush bean, and in theory we could cross it with this red noodle bean. They're both beans. They can cross. So because they can cross, the offspring, the seeds that are saved from that cross, right? So growing in season 1, we're going to grow one of these and one of these. We're going to take the flower from one and do the birds and the bees with it. And then when the seeds are formed, those seeds will have traits of both the provider and the red noodle combined. Meaning that when we grow them, we may get a really super long green bean. We may get a really short, stumpy purple bean. You're going to get some traits of both in there, and it's a total crapshoot as to what you're going to actually end up with. And so that is a hybrid. But over the years, plant breeders have actually been able to get way more precise with the traits that you're looking for to basically get exactly what you want out of a cross. Sometimes it takes a couple iterations. It's not always perfect the first time around, but that's why plant breeders have a job, is because their job is to find two really awesome crops, pull the traits out from both that are ideal to end up with a new crop that is superior to maybe one or the other or whatever. It could be more drought resistant, more disease resistant, more productive, shorter, taller. There's literally a limitless amount of possibilities, but that's all a hybrid is. It's just a cross between two. Now that also leads me to open pollinated, because that's the next step down the line. If you take a hybrid and you save that hybrid and you can actually find those traits, get them to reproduce, and you can actually make it consistent, over the course of about 7 to 9 years, that trait becomes stable. And that's what's considered open pollinated. That basically means that it is stable and it's on its way to becoming an heirloom. Now an heirloom is basically just a open pollinated variety that's been grown for a long period of time. Those two varieties, when crossed, will have a certain period of time for those variations, the quirkiness and the weirdness, to kind of drop out and become consistent. And essentially what you're looking for with an heirloom seed is consistency. That's the thing. All right, next is days to germination. This is how many days it takes from the moment that seed is in the ground until it sprouts. That's pretty obvious. But then you have days to maturity, and this is where you get really confused. Maybe not you, but a lot of you do get confused. Days to maturity is the days after it sprouts. So once that seed emerges from the soil, that is when the clock is ticking until it produces a viable fruit or a viable harvest. Now that harvest is what is considered societally acceptable. And that's maybe a little bit confusing to some of you, but it's basically what society deems to be an edible version of what you're growing. They might have a tomato already formed at 65 days, okay? By most accounts, that plant has matured and it's forming fruit. But until that fruit actually ripens and turns red, that's when society says, that's a tomato. I want to also state, some seed packets will say total season. If it doesn't say days to germination or days to maturity and it says total season, that's basically adding the two together. That is from the moment you put the seed in the ground until you get a harvest. That is the total amount of days it takes from start to finish. So you may see it in a couple different variations, but that's basically all that means. All right, so the final term we're going to talk about in this episode, because there's probably a lot more. If you're still confused about different terminologies that exist out there, feel free to drop them in the comments box down below. I'll make sure to read them, and if there's enough of them, we'll do a part 2 to this episode, but we're already getting long enough as it is, and I'm sure you want to move on with the rest of your life. But we're going to talk about the difference in icons when it comes to full sun, or even part shade. So when it comes to our packets at least, most packets are going to have this, and it's a sun icon. Now the sun icon is either going to be all white, like in the case of this butterbush squash here, or it's going to be half white and half black, like in the case of this stinging nettle. Now, obviously, all white means full sun, and that basically indicates how much sunlight that plant needs to grow and produce fruit. The amount of hours is typically seen as full sun being 5 to 7 hours. They can get more than that, absolutely. They're not going to usually care. They probably won't complain if they get 8, 9, 10 hours, but they need at least 5 to 7 hours. And that is direct sunlight. That means the plant can see the sun and the sun can see the plant. If there's any type of tree cover or shading, it's filtered in some way, that's not full sun. I want to be really clear on that. Then you have a case like the stinging nettle, which is half white and half black, and that's partial sun or part sun. That means they need at least 3 to 5 hours of direct sun. Again, that is direct sun. The sun can see the plant can see the sun. There's no shade, there's no filtered light in there. That is how many hours of sunlight it needs. Then you also get into part shade. Now, part shade is a little bit different, and some plants, not most of your vegetables and stuff that you're going to have in most seed shops are not going to have part shade, but every once in a while you will come across it. So I wanted to leave you with this information, otherwise I wouldn't be doing my job. Part shade is where you get into that filtered light. It can handle an understory, right? If it's underneath a tree, it's going to have some light coming through. The ambient light around the area is going to be enough to grow that crop, but it needs that part sun, maybe morning sun. Maybe the morning sun is totally full, and then the afternoon, the afternoon/evening sun is totally full, but midday it's got filtered light coming through a tree. That absolutely qualifies. It needs at least 3 to 5 hours of sunlight, but some of that sunlight throughout the day can be filtered. And so that is kind of what you're looking for those three. And the icon for part shade will sometimes be still a half sun. It's still going to be half white, half black. In other cases, it may have a sun with some clouds on it. Really just depends on the brand. We go half sun and full sun to keep things really simple for people. That way it just reduces the confusion even less, or reduces the confusion even more, I should say, and kind of streamlines things. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and I really do hope that this video helped to teach you and enlighten you, because there's a lot of terms that are thrown around, and unfortunately, if you go to the store or you're shopping and you don't know what those terms mean, it can be a little bit overwhelming and definitely a little bit daunting. But hopefully this episode helped. If it did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and also make sure to check out MIgardener.com. We have a ton of seeds and a lot of information on the back of the packets to help you grow big. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care.